This is a quiet story, told slowly. There's nothing you need to do, and nothing you need to remember. You can listen closely, or let the words fade into the background as you rest. The story will move gently, without sudden moments, and it will stay with you whether you're awake or drifting off. Tonight's story is The Last Bus Before Dawn. The bus shelter stood slightly apart from the road, its glass panels clouded by years of weather and fingerprints. A single strip light inside hummed softly, casting a pale glow onto the concrete beneath it. Beyond that circle of light, the town rested in its late-night quiet. Streets empty enough to feel provisional, as though they might be packed away by morning. The timetable was fixed to the back wall, its edges curling slightly. Most of the routes listed no longer ran at this hour. Only one line remained active, its departure time marked without emphasis, as if it did not expect much attention. The bench inside the shelter was cold when Thomas sat down. He placed his hands on his knees and let the chill seep through the fabric of his coat. It grounded him. He had learned, over the years, that waiting became easier when the body was acknowledged rather than ignored. The air smelled faintly of damp concrete and distant rain, a neutral scent that belonged to no particular memory. Thomas had not planned to be here tonight. The decision had arrived gradually, forming out of small delays and quiet refusals. A conversation that ended earlier than expected. A house that felt too full of sound once the door closed. The knowledge that the last bus still ran, even if most people had forgotten it did. He leaned back against the shelter wall and watched the road. The streetlights held steady, their light falling in regular intervals along the pavement. Somewhere farther away, a traffic signal changed with a muted click, though no cars waited to respond. The town seemed to be maintaining its routines out of habit rather than necessity. Thomas checked his watch, then turned it face down on his wrist. Time behaved differently here. It stretched without tension, expanding to fill the space available. He did not feel late. He did not feel early. He felt suspended in a moment that did not ask for definition. He thought briefly of the first time he had taken this bus. It had been years ago, during a period when nights felt longer and decisions felt heavier. He remembered standing in this same shelter, hands in his pockets, breath fogging the glass. The bus had arrived then with a sigh of brakes and a wash of interior light, offering movement without demand. He had boarded without knowing exactly where he would get off. Tonight felt quieter than that memory. The shelter creaked faintly as a breeze moved through, rattling one of the loose panels. Thomas adjusted his position on the bench, shifting his weight until he found a place that felt steady. He did not reach for his phone. He had learned that waiting did not need filling. It needed space. A cat crossed the road at the far end of the street, its movement quick and purposeful. It disappeared into shadow without hesitation. Thomas watched until it was gone, then returned his attention to the empty road. The bus was due in 12 minutes. He let that knowledge rest without pressure. 12 minutes was neither long nor short. It was simply the amount of time before something else arrived. Thomas breathed slowly, noticing the way the shelter amplified sound. His own breath sounded louder here, the soft exhale bouncing back from glass and metal. The hum of the light above him remained constant, a thin thread of noise that stitched the silence together. He thought of where the bus would take him, the route wound out of town, past industrial estates and darkened shops, toward the edge of the city, where streets widened and lights thinned. He had no intention of staying there. He knew that. The journey itself was the point. Movement without destination. A chance to let the mind follow rather than lead. The shelter held him in its small square of light. Outside it, the night felt broader, less contained. Thomas remained seated, letting the contrast settle. A gust of wind pushed at the glass, carrying with it the smell of rain now closer, sharper. He pulled his coat tighter, not to keep the cold out entirely, but to feel the weight of it. The coat was old, its lining softened by use. It carried its own familiarity, a reminder of continuity. The road remained empty. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment and listened. The town breathed around him, a low, steady presence. No urgency moved through it now. No one hurried. Even the night seemed content to pause. When he opened his eyes again, the shelter looked unchanged. The timetable still curled at the edges. The bench remained cold. The light hummed. The waiting continued. Somewhere beyond the curve of the road, an engine sound emerged faintly, then faded. Thomas did not react. He had learned not to lean too quickly toward expectation. The bus would arrive when it arrived. Anticipation did not hasten it. He shifted again, crossing his ankles beneath the bench. The movement was small, almost unconscious. His body understood waiting as a series of adjustments rather than a fixed state. The minutes passed without marking themselves. Thomas remained seated, present without effort, held by the shelter and the soft glow of its light. Whatever had driven him here no longer pressed against him. It had loosened, given space to breathe. The road ahead stayed empty. For now, that was enough. The bus arrived without announcement. Its headlights appeared first, rounding the bend in the road with steady patience. The engine sound followed, low and unhurried, growing louder only as it drew close. The vehicle slowed as it approached the shelter, brakes releasing a soft hiss rather than a complaint. Thomas stood as the bus pulled in. The doors opened with a familiar fold of sound, and warm light spilled onto the pavement. The interior looked much as it always had. Rows of seats in muted colours, handrails worn smooth by countless hands, the faint smell of fabric and oil, and something indefinably human that belonged to public transport everywhere. He stepped aboard and nodded once to the driver. The driver returned the gesture without words, already turning attention back to the road. There were no other passengers. Thomas did not find that strange. This route belonged to a smaller hour, one that did not invite company. He chose a seat halfway down, by the window, and settled in. The vinyl was cool, but not uncomfortable. He placed his bag at his feet and rested his hands loosely in his lap. As the doors closed and the bus pulled away from the shelter, the light outside shifted. The small square of brightness left behind without ceremony. The town began to move past the windows. Streetlights slid by in even intervals, their reflections stretching briefly across the glass before dissolving. Shop fronts appeared shuttered and dark, their signage unreadable at this speed and light. The bus did not hurry. It followed the road with the same calm insistence Thomas had felt while waiting. He watched without expectation. The bus crossed an intersection where signals changed for no one, lights cycling through their colours in the absence of traffic. The movement felt oddly reassuring. Systems continued even when no one was watching. The world did not require constant participation to remain intact. Thomas leaned his head lightly against the window and let the vibration of the engine travel through him. The motion steadied his thoughts, smoothing them into something less defined. He did not revisit the evening that had led him here. That story had already loosened its hold. The bus offered no encouragement to return to it. Outside the town centre, the buildings thinned. Industrial units replaced houses, their outlines blocky and unadorned. Fences ran alongside the road, interrupted by gates that stood open or closed without obvious purpose. The bus passed them all with the same attention, not lingering, not avoiding. Thomas noticed the way his body responded to the journey. His shoulders dropped slightly. His breathing slowed further. The act of being carried asked nothing of him except presence. He did not need to decide anything yet. He did not need to arrive anywhere in particular. The bus turned onto a longer stretch of road, one that led away from familiar streets. Here, the lights were fewer, spaced farther apart. The dark between them felt deeper, but not threatening. It was simply unlit, allowed to remain itself. A single car passed in the opposite direction, its headlights flaring briefly before vanishing behind. The road returned to quiet. Thomas adjusted his position, stretching his legs out slightly. The movement felt natural, part of the slow conversation between body and seat. He glanced toward the front of the bus, where the driver sat in steady focus, hands easy on the wheel. The driver did not look back. This was not a route that required reassurance. The bus crossed a small bridge, the sound of tires changing subtly as they passed over it. Water moved beneath, unseen but present, its existence known only by the way the sound shifted. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment and listened to that change, then let it go. When he opened them again, the road ahead was empty. He considered where he might get off. A stop near the edge of the city, a place where the pavement ended and open ground began. He had done that before, stepped down into early morning air and walked without destination until the sky changed colour. He did not decide yet. The bus did not ask him to. The interior lights hummed softly. The engine maintained its rhythm. Outside, the world continued to thin and widen at the same time. Buildings giving way to space. Thomas felt the quiet settle more deeply. The bus carried him onward, unremarkable and reliable, holding him between where he had been and wherever he would choose to stand when the road finally curved toward morning. The journey continued, steady and uninterrupted, asking nothing more than that he remain seated and allow himself to be moved. The bus slowed before Thomas expected it to. The road widened slightly, the streetlights thinning until they stood alone in long stretches of dark. The driver eased the vehicle toward the curb at a stop marked only by a small sign and a patch of worn pavement. No buildings stood nearby. The land beyond the road opened into quiet space, grass and low ground barely visible in the dim light. Thomas stood as the bus came to rest. He moved without hurry, lifting his bag and stepping into the aisle. The driver glanced toward the mirror and nodded once, the gesture unremarkable and sufficient. The doors opened, and cooler air entered, carrying the scent of damp earth and the promise of morning not far off. Thomas stepped down onto the pavement. The bus remained for a moment, engine idling, lights steady. The driver waited without pressing him. Thomas turned back, and offered a brief nod of thanks. The doors folded closed, and the bus pulled away, its lights receding along the road until they curved out of sight. Silence returned. The stop felt different without the shelter. No glass to hold light, no bench to claim. Just open air and the road stretching in two directions, both equally empty. Thomas stood and listened, aware of how much space surrounded him now. The sky had begun to shift. The darkness overhead softened into a deep blue, almost imperceptible, unless watched closely. A faint line of lighter colour traced the horizon. Not yet sunrise, but its quiet intention. The air felt cooler here, cleaner, carrying the sound of distant water, moving somewhere unseen. Thomas walked a few steps away from the road and stopped. He did not know exactly why he had chosen this place to disembark. The decision had arrived gently, without justification. That was enough. He set his bag down and stood with his hands in his pockets, feeling the ground beneath his feet, solid and patient. He breathed in slowly. The night did not resist him. It held him briefly, then began to release its grip as morning approached. The weight he had carried earlier felt lighter now, not because it had been solved, but because it no longer demanded his full attention. Thomas looked back once. Though the bus was gone, the road remained, unchanged by his departure. The town lay somewhere behind him, its lights dimming as the sky prepared to take over. Ahead, the open ground waited without invitation or refusal. He felt no urgency to move. This was not a moment for decisions or plans. It was a moment for standing still and allowing the shift to complete itself. The journey had done its work quietly, without spectacle. He did not need to do anything in response. As the first hint of warmth touched the air, Thomas lifted his bag and began to walk, choosing no particular direction at first, letting the path form beneath his steps. The ground accepted his weight. The morning accepted his presence. Behind him, the road remained empty. Ahead, the day waited, not demanding arrival, only offering itself when he was ready. Thomas walked on, unhurried, carrying with him the simple knowledge that movement did not always require destination, and waiting did not always need an answer. When the sun finally began to rise, he was already at rest within the motion of it.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thank you for supporting the channel.